As you build your event architectures, you're going on your journey, you have loads of events, loads of consumers, and you have this. We mentioned a bit of this earlier about coupling through contracts. Okay, this is often overlooked. We are raising the order placed event. Thank you, we will consume it as it is. By doing this, by consuming a message or event as it is, you are a conformist by default. Okay? What do I mean by this? So an example, this is bounded context mapping. So now we're leading into domain-driven design and understanding how practices there can help us build event-driven solutions. So a conformist is something where we have an event. We consume an event as it is. An example of this would be the order service. The order has been placed. We are the fulfillment service. Thank you very much. We have all this information. We consume it. In fact, we have this model, this order model, just all over the code base because we consume it as it is, the fulfillment service. This may or may not be a problem, but an example would be what happens if the order service decides to change the schema, change the payload, then this fulfillment service would just break. So what other patterns are there out there to help us mitigate against that risk? We could do something like anti-corruption layers, right? We can say, thank you for the event. We are the fulfillment service. The first thing we're going to do is change it into a model, into a language that we understand as a service. We have that protection around our service. Okay? Anti-corruption layers, a different way of handling this. Equally, the opposite. So we can push back onto the producer and say, no, we agreed a contract. We agreed a public contract in this organization. You are going to do the mapping, and we can fully understand that. Okay? Different patterns depending on different circumstances. Now, the interesting thing here is with these bounded context mappings is actually understanding the level of communication that is required for each one. Okay? Example here would be the conformist. Requires a very high level of communication. Because if the producer is changing contracts and they may break schemas, they've got to talk to the consumers. Okay? There is this communication that is constantly required. Now again, this might make sense, and we're going to speak about this in a second. But equally, on the other side of that, the less communication would be open host service. We had that initial communication, we agreed on a standard, right? But now, once the standard has been established, it's less communication that is required. So again, thinking about these. And I highly recommend, there are loads more by the way, this is all open source. Highly recommend having a look at the context map cheat sheet. Just being aware of how am I consuming my events in my event architectures? How am I going to be coupled by this contract, and how is that going to affect our service? So what we're talking about here is private and public information. Now, I'll give you an example. We are the order service. Everyone in this room, the order service is very successful, lots of people. We decide to have an AWS account for this service. We're using EventBridge as an example to communicate between maybe little microservices inside of this service that we have. Now, because we are the order service, we can raise private domain events using this technology. What do I mean by this? If I add type TW on the event that we discussed earlier, this may not be a problem because everyone in this service understands the implementation details of that service. Okay? Private information. This is completely different to public events. Events we use to communicate outside the boundaries. Examples, order service, talking to payment domains here. That type TW no longer makes sense. That implementation detail no longer makes sense. Okay, we're using the same technology under the hood. We may be using SQS, EventBridge as an example. It's all around contracts. It's all about domains. It's all about boundaries of information. And again, understanding that coupling, understanding that distance, again, can really help you as you build event architectures, as you go on that journey, again, just thinking about these nuances and the trade-offs that you will be making.